Okay, so I'll get started. So welcome again, everyone who's just joined us. I'm delighted to be hosting tonight's Soda Social event, which will be our first ever diversity in data event. You can expect an hour of panel discussion with a live Q&A throughout and half an hour following the event for those that wish to continue the conversation further. My name is Alex Wilshire and I'm the co-founder of Diversity in Data. After over 10 years recruiting within the data and broader technology space, I have seen firsthand the huge imbalance that pervades within data across all industries, with many demographic groups still woefully underrepresented. The reason companies should be taking diversity hiring seriously isn't just to tick a box. It isn't because of some CSR initiative or to give people a chance just for the sake of it. It's because truly diverse teams are not only more innovative, but they are ultimately higher performing and more successful. And the stats prove it. Gartner 2019's report into diversity and inclusion forecasts that through 2022, 75% of organizations with frontline decision-making teams that reflected a diverse and inclusive culture will outperform their financial targets, and indeed will outperform, and gender diverse teams will also outperform gender-homogeneous teams, which are less inclusive by 50% on average. But despite this knowledge, and with many companies being cognizant of the above facts, why and how do so many companies still get it so wrong? Well, hopefully, in some small way, the Diversity in Data event series can help that. Throughout this series, we'll be exploring what companies could and should be doing in order to attract, hire, and retain talent from a range of demographic groups. Over the series, we'll be discussing what companies should be doing to attract, hire, and retain talent from different gender, ethnic, age, religious, disability, sexual orientation, socio-economic, veteran, neurodiverse groups, and more. Lastly, before we kick things off, please note that this is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our Soda Social YouTube channel, where you will also be able to access all of our previous webinars. While you are on YouTube, please also head over to Women in DevOps, which is our partner brand, which is focused on the diversity imbalance which pervades within the DevOps space specifically. Our second poll question, I believe, will be going up at some point shortly. And as I've said before, we will be following up this event with an article. So any contributions that you folks can make, either on the poll questions, but also in the chat box, would be hugely appreciated. But lastly, before I introduce the panel, I'd just like to say thank you. It's not often that recruiters get listened to like this, so thank you very much for that. And now I'll pass over to our fabulous panel. Folks, if you could introduce yourself, your roles and your experience first, and then after everyone has introduced themselves, we'll then start heading into the questions. Firstly, Nikki.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. So I'm Nikki, and I'm quite recently in a new role. I'm the Chief Data Officer for Kantar Public. So we use data to inform public policy making around the world for social impact, which is very exciting. I'm very happy to be there. And before that, I was Chief Data Officer at Direct Line Insurance. And before that, I was at dunnhumby for quite a long time, almost 20 years working in data and analytics. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation tonight, because I agree with Alex and the panel that we've got so much more to do. So hi, everyone.
Oh, there's the first gaffe. I was still on mute. Next up, Sadika, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name's Sadika. I'm a senior analyst at The Guardian. I am also co-founder of Black in Data. Now, Black in Data was set up by myself and my colleague at The Guardian, Davina, simply because of the experiences that we started to have around the challenges that Black people particularly face within the data space. There's always been this deep sense of isolation, loneliness, not knowing who you can talk to when you're having data issues and personal issues that sometimes are deeply related to our ethnicity. So we set up Black in Data to help other ethnic minority groups to find space to network, share a bit of code and a bit of chinwag, a very inclusive space for all people of color.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Sadika. And Schwetter.
Hey, everyone. Very, very excited to be here. So I have almost 20 years of product management experience, and I'm a co-founder and a CPO for a company called MachineMax. We are building a next generation, a sustainable construction and mining industry with the help of data. And I've been involved in diversity and data discussions since I don't know how long. and I've seen a lot of progress, and I'm super excited to be here and looking forward to this discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Schwetter. And David.
Hey, just make sure I come off mute. So there's one thing I do, I learn, I tell you. So good evening, everybody, and welcome. Just the same as the rest of the panelists here. So I'm David Crisp, and I head up the projects and program delivery team at NatWest for data and analytics technology. I've got about 20 years financial services experience, and I've cut across mainstream banking, direct line as well, one of my fellow panelists there, and for the last 3.5 years been back at NatWest. Got invited to come along here, and I was a bit surprised, never done anything like this before, but excited. And I suppose the reason I got invited along is I'm in the marketplace probably weekly, trying to make sure I can find, and my teams can find, the very best talent that's out there to deal with the level of work that we're undertaking just now. So great to be on board tonight.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. So into the questions now. So my first question is for Schwetter. So we've had the privilege to work very closely with you over the past few months. And one of the things that we've certainly noticed, and many of the people that we're representing have noticed, is that you have built a really high-performing, diverse team at MachineMax, where so many of your other competitors, specifically within your industry, have really struggled. What do you believe it is that MachineMax have done that has made this possible?
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, and thanks for noticing that. So one thing which we are very proud of is that we have women at every level. And when we talk about, so let's talk about when we say what do we mean by when we say it's a high performing team. In our opinion, high performing team is when 1 + 1 is equals to 11. And there was a study done by Google, and this was a project Aristotle. It was called Project Aristotle. They went into this and try and understand what are those teams who are high performing, and why are they doing it? Like, how are they able to achieve that? So there are a couple of factors which came out, and number one was psychological safety. And we took it a step further and said, why just limit it to psychological safety? Why can't we say we can be psychological secure? And to be psychological secure, I think there are a couple of things which we need to keep it in mind. One is when we are hiring people, we always focus on hiring people that are better than you. There is a quotation by Steve Jobs, which I remember that, he said that it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. And that has always been our motto from day one, that we will be hiring people who are better than us, and they can challenge us and take us a step further. Second thing which we kept in mind is leveraging the team diversity. And like I said, when I started this conversation, that we have women and at every level. We have women in board. I am one of the co-founders. We have women in C-level. We have women in sales, engineering, you talk about it. And that has been always a motto for us, that how can we leverage team diversity? And like you said, Alex, in the beginning, it's the diversity and inclusion is not just a vanity matrix. It actually impacts your revenues. The diverse teams are more innovative. They are more complete, and they have a holistic point of view. And third thing which we said is, how can we prioritize collective success? And there are certain principles we put in face. Our values were like, whether we like it or not, or whether we build a culture or not build a culture, there would be a culture. So let's start with building a culture from day one itself. And that's how we prioritized collective success. There are certain values and cultures and principles which everyone believes in as part of MachineMax. And then all along the way, keep having fun. Like, that's been our main secret success, I would say, that we kept on having fun all the way along. It's not a serious topic. It is a serious topic, but again, it's not a serious topic for us that much. And I think that's why we could achieve what we have done today.
Excellent. That's fantastic. And I think as you've really said there, it really does come from the top, right from the start, and from the leaders within the business. And Nikki, we've spoken at length around role models specifically, and of course leaders. How important are visible role models when it comes to improving D&I within data?
Well, they are very important, and there's a phrase that a role model that was very influential in my career uses, which is it's difficult to be it if you can't see it. And that role model is Edwina Dunn, who was one of the founders of dunnhumby, and I think that I actually took it for granted that I sort of grew a major part of my career in an organization that was led by a woman, that and in the sort of data and technology space. So for me, that all felt very normal. And it was only when much later on in my career when I got my first executive role, and I was given a new job to lead one of our markets, and actually it was our HR business partner in our US business who said to me, "Oh, it's really cool that you've got this role, Nikki, because you're the first woman to have one of these roles, and a lot of people are going to be really, looking at you, and, you're going to be their role model." And I thought, blimey, that's a bit, I kind of felt a bit sort of, burdened by it at first. But then I realized that actually, because I had seen it, it just sort of felt like it was available, and I could relate to it. And I do think I took that for granted. And I've really reflected over more recent times over, actually, think of how many people that I work with who don't see it, who don't see someone that looks like them on the leadership team. And okay, it is great that we've made quite a lot of progress on gender diversity, but actually in most other areas, we still got, a huge way to go. And so I do think it's super important. And actually, yeah, I guess that after that role, I've worked at 2 companies since, and both of them have got female CEOs actually. And I was last at Direct Line, where when I was there, we got a new CEO, and she was the 7th CEO in the FTSE 100 who was a woman. And it was true at that point that there were more, what was it, more guys called Matt and Richard or whatever the names were in that list than there were women. And so that's tough. But actually, we've got the best representation when it comes to gender, but if we look at other areas, it's pretty poor. And I don't know about you guys, but when I'm now sort of working on screens and you've got little tiles of people, how many people look different to you? And I think it's still not actually that many a lot of the time. So I think role models are incredibly important, and I now realize that that's a responsibility for us to get out there and be seen actually, and to help people to sort of believe that they can get there too. And it's almost that the least represented you are, unfortunately, it kind of feels like the more important that is.
Absolutely, definitely. And I think a very real world example of that has been with the pictures you said with the of the vice presidents, and how many of them look the same, and obviously with Kamala Harris looking completely and utterly different, and I think that was something which for me was extremely powerful, despite the fact that all of the people above looked a lot more like me. I certainly felt an awful lot more inspired by obviously the new vice president, for sure. I've also just realised that I should have announced that poll 2 question, or the second poll question, will be coming up very shortly on the screen. There it is. So if you guys, as I say, I've said it many times, we will be writing an article following this. So yeah, please do take part. On the topic there, Nikki, you just mentioned there, of course, about there being a huge amount of progress that's been made, particularly within gender. There is still a long way to go. One of the areas which absolutely needs a huge amount of work in all real levels is around ethnic minorities and race. And Sadika, I know obviously it's something that's very important to you, and what I was really keen to find out is, what do you feel organizations could and should be doing to make people from ethnic minority backgrounds feel more accepted in the workplace and ultimately increase retention?
Nikki, you kind of hit a soft, sore spot there for me with the whole, if you can't see it, you can't be it, because that literally has been my life. I go to all of these seminars, all of these conferences, and nobody looks like me. So then to continuously say that, I just feel like it's such a stab in my heart. It makes me feel like I shouldn't even be in that space. So that's kind of a little sore thing for me there, but I'm working on it. So in terms of representation and ethnicity, literally Black people are only 3% within the data space. So it's extremely isolating. And in terms of the question of what can we do to feel accepted, we ran a little poll on Black in Data group to see just kind of how the group are feeling about this particular question. And the number one thing that came out was we needed to have representation within all levels. So it's fine now, we're all getting there, in the early stages of our career. There's nobody there that looks like us in senior management. There's nobody there that looks like us in exco level. So what does that mean for us? It means we are not welcome. It means we are not accepted. So if you are truly, truly in this to make us feel welcome and accepted, that work needs to go in there to have representation at all levels. And the second thing that resonated quite well with the group members was about career progression. So a lot of people feel like once they are in that space, they literally have to fight tooth and nail to progress in their career, to have recognition, to get the training that they need in order to move on. And training is so important because it just indicates to the employee that you're willing to invest in them. So the moment you start actually physically, financially investing in an individual, they will feel closer to the organization, they will be more likely to stay in that organization, and hence increase more people of color coming through. So my particular example I'd like to give you is when I actually went for my interview at The Guardian, I had fantastic offers from other organizations that they were pretty cool. But the decider there for me was I met another Black woman. That literally sealed it for me. It meant that The Guardian was a welcoming place for Black and ethnic minority people. If that lady there as a Black woman is there and is thriving at The Guardian, that means I can also thrive and do well at The Guardian. So other things pop up within our conversations about authentic anti-racism policies. We don't want to just see people going into their 1 hour, unconscious bias training and then they walk out. That doesn't resolve the problem that we have with people that are actually very, very racist, and the companies are doing nothing about it. We need to see robust anti-racism trainings, a method for companies to actually measure how well that they're doing. They need to be transparent in the work that they're doing to combat anti-racism. So there's like a wealth of things that people can do or organizations can do to make us feel inclusive. But I feel like those were the top 3 that really resonated with the group.
Excellent. Have you seen any examples, would you say, of companies or stories or anecdotes that you've felt have actually started to address that and have moved in the right direction and perhaps could be used as a template for other organizations?
I can only speak for the place where I'm working now at The Guardian, and I will say they are actively taking steps in addressing. By no means are we there, but the fact that these conversations have actually started, they are talking to the community. That's a huge factor. If you want to resolve this issue, you have to engage with the right community. You have to find people like us, Black in Data, other massive Black tech organizations that are out there to create and sort of help you along the way as a consultative manner to guide you along. That way we know the policies that you're going to write are authentic and they're coming directly from us because it affects us. So yeah, The Guardian's doing a lot. I mean, we're talking baby steps, but at least it's a step in the right direction.
Excellent. So that's good to hear. And as we've said, there is still, of course, a huge way to go with that. And I think that certainly, as you've kind of alluded to there, and as has been previously talked about, it really does come from leadership. And I think we've talked a lot about.
No, I don't really agree that it has to come from leadership. I feel like a lot of ground has been made from people, from the bottom up. When your staff are very passionate about these sort of things, I know that's how we've managed to get a lot of things changed in my organization, is because we actually feel passionate about something and push it right up. It happens a lot faster if the top are bought in, but it can work both ways.
Yes, absolutely. And I think regardless of obviously the bottom top whatever way around you look at it. I think as Nikki and I have talked about directly in the past before, that there is an awful lot that leadership can do to enable, but also to hinder improving diversity and inclusion. And I think that's something you were touching upon there, Sadika, about the interview process, and without really knowing about it, leadership are actually hindering it rather than enabling it. And you can't just sit there and not do something actively about it, because by not doing something actively about it, you're hindering it just by sitting still. So so Nikki, how do you feel, and how do you think that leadership behaviors and examples of behaviors that have or do enable and indeed hinder improving diversity in data?
Well, I guess in the end, it's very simple, like most things, which is it's not what you say, it's what you do that counts, right? So, you know, anyone can talk about, oh, you know, this is important to us, but, you know, if then their teams don't reflect that, then so what, you know, because it's the outcome that matters. So I think that for leaders, it really is about making it happen rather than talking about it. And I do think that lots more sort of measurement needs to be in place around that, because if you do really believe in diversity, then kind of make it a metric that people have to, you know, meet. And I know that sort of, you know, in some ways you might say, oh, I don't, you know, it shouldn't really be metrics driven, but I think it has to be, because otherwise it won't happen fast enough. And I don't think there's many organizations that are doing that. And I think more broadly as well, that then you've got to live it through the behaviors that people see in you every day. And that goes for everyone really, but for leaders, they do cast a shadow, you know, over an organization. And I was sort of reflecting on some of my own experiences where if you're in an environment where the leaders, they kind of, their behavior, and I'll pick this one because I've experienced it quite a lot myself, they're kind of, you know, emailing last thing at night, on your case in the morning, and you feel like you have to be there. If you've got other commitments in your life that you're trying to juggle, you kind of feel that that's not going to work, or that you don't fit in, or, you know, that you don't fit that mold because you can't operate like that, you know. And I do think that the role of leaders is to create the environment that people can see themselves working in successfully and being themselves, and, you know, looking after their kids, or, you know, whatever it is that they need to do as well. And I think that it all boils down to if that's the outcome that you really want, then you have to make it happen, and you have to show those behaviors yourself rather than just sort of, you know, talk the good talk. It's obvious really, but, you know, it's just the reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I know there's a question that has just come up there, which hopefully it dovetails in quite nicely. But yeah, I think I mean Ali's question there, just sort of, well, his experience really growing up in the UK, but being from a Pakistani man, he said that he's struggled over the last 36 years, and he's always felt silenced and ignored. And work has been okay, but certainly in the past, previous generations have of course struggled. And I know, Sadika, that you've talked a lot in the past around, or we've spoken a lot, should I say, about bringing your whole self to work, which is something you touched upon there, Nikki. And regardless of what that means, whether it means gender or ethnicity or sexual orientation or whatever, I think it really does mean so. It means so much to every single demographic group, regardless of whether or not you're an ethnic minority or you're diverse, so to speak. Because bringing your whole self to work is something which so many companies talk about, but it really is very difficult to actually execute it. And again, that's something which it's very difficult to measure, isn't it? You can ask staff in a survey, how do you feel? Do you feel that you can bring your whole self to work? And typically some people will either not respond to those types of things, or they'll respond in a way that they feel will keep the harmony, if you like, or if they do voice their opinions, they might be persecuted against in some way, or hindered in some way from progressing up the ladder, so to speak, within their careers. One thing that we've obviously talked a lot about, sort of leadership, and Sadika, you've talked about, you know, from the bottom up, and people starting their careers, and people that are in, you know, more junior positions, should we say. And Schwetter, we've talked as well about the disconnect between education and the working world. And I'm not going to pretend that I found this out, because you definitely told me, but STEM graduating classes, particularly in the US, there being far greater diversity than in the professional world, with a high percentage of valedictorians being from either gender or ethnic backgrounds, diverse backgrounds. But when you look in the real world in those jobs, there isn't too much diversity at all. What do you believe are the reasons for this, and what should be being done to address this?
Yeah, so it's very interesting you said that, and we spoke about it, Alex, as well, that there are 70% of valedictorians are women. And when we look in the real world, we don't see that kind of mix. So it's definitely not a pipeline problem, right? So they initially, when we used to talk about 10 years back, diversity and inclusion, there was lots and lots of emphasis on, like, you know, is this because there is this, you know, pipeline problem is there. So this definitely debunks that. The focus then shifted to the implementation side of the thing. And I think that's where the structural issues is. So if you look at any, so Sadika was mentioning that when you go enter in a tech conference, you would want to see your reflections. That's a similar thing when people come for an interview. They, not only you are assessing a candidate is also assessing you. And if you don't see that kind of your kind of role models, or there are stereotypes which is there are certain decisions which are taken on that basis. So if you see, there is the entry problem, like when you're recruiting, what kind of representation is there at that point in time. So when remember, Alex, when we were hiring for an engineer, I did ask you, can you put women in mix? Can you put, you know, in people from diverse background into the mix? Because if you start asking the questions right at the front, then you'll get even the recruiter from a recruitment agency or from a recruitment standpoint, they would be aware that, you know, this is not, I have to source. So there is a sourcing thing, like, you know, the right kind of people are coming into the pipeline, and you're getting the right kind of sourcing. Then there is a retention. Are you able to retain those kind of people or from diverse background or not? And I think that is where there are structural issues, I would say, because the retention is a long-term process. It's not a PR stunt or a marketing thing where you can hire, you know, lots and lots of companies do that they have a D&I head or which is the way I say it is like putting lipstick on pig. They, not everyone, but in certain cases, it is a marketing or a PR thing. So it goes back to, is it a long-term, the proof lies in the pudding. Are you changing the dot? Are you moving the needle there or not? And the needle is only moved when there is a long-term strategic structural changes and the numbers are speaking for itself. So the retention becomes quite important. And then there is a whole notion of growth. Because I don't know whether Nikki mentioned or Sadika mentioned, there are 3% of people on the board level are, you know, if you talk about FTSE 500 or wherever, there are very less representation, whether we talk about people in color, people, you know, people, when we talk about gender, the representation is very less. So all these three things makes a lot of difference. And that's why we don't see that kind of a mix. There was a very interesting article which came a few years back, which was about, and the guy who wrote was like, he was completely ostracized from Silicon Valley. He wrote about the old white boys club. And he spoke about how in Silicon Valley, for example, there used to be this boys club, or when you know, the dude culture. And when you see that kind of stereotype, people don't, from a retention standpoint, from a growth standpoint, it does make a lot of difference. And that's why I see the focus should be the sourcing, the retention, and the growth.
Absolutely. And I know that me, you and Sadika have talked about the culture and particularly in London, but I guess throughout the whole of the UK, around how we celebrate wins and how we celebrate victories in all industries. And typically it's down the pub or it's in a restaurant where people are going to be drinking an awful lot. And if you don't drink, or even if you do drink, that can be a really alienating way of spending your time, because you don't want to spend that way. And that's something which really hit home for me, that I've realized that over the time, for me personally, I can't think, I mean, particularly because we're in lockdown at the moment, but I can think of anything better than to go to the pub and have conversations. But I also realized that so many of the really important things that have happened in my career, important meetings, both externally and internally, have been either in a pub or in a restaurant, in an environment where people are drinking, which isn't inclusive in any way, shape or form. And if that is, I wouldn't say I've necessarily worked at any cultures where drinking is a really strong culture, but in cultures where that is the case, that could certainly be very alienating and certainly fly in the face of retention. In terms of, obviously, we talked there about right at the sort of start of the career ladder, and Sadika, we've talked, and I was really keen to find out your views on how a career in data can be demystified for people within the of an ethnic minority.
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about this, Alex, and I found that for me personally, a lot of the promotional material that comes out of data industry is just not reflective of my background. So it tends to be when I tell people what I do, they think, oh, okay, do you just work with geeky white guys? So how do we then try to move away from just, sorry, David. So yeah, it is on the companies to actually start having accurate representations of what data looks like. We are really quite, I mean, not ethnically diverse, but it's quite rich. We have females. We have a massive range of people that they can start to do. Think about your websites when you're creating these things. I'm not saying go out and find fake people, but really think about how you are portraying the whole data industry as it is, right? So that's number one thing. And a second thing that we're doing in particular in Black in Data is actually reaching out to universities, to secondary schools in areas that are predominantly made up of ethnic diverse, a lot of BAME people live, and starting the conversation very, very early about a possible path into data. And then when we talk about data, not to make it overcomplicated, especially when we're dealing with young people. Try to make it sound cool. Try to make it look like an environment where a young person would like to join into it and they can potentially thrive in that space. So really stripping out the idea of you've got to look a certain way, because there isn't one way to be a data analyst or a data scientist. Everyone can be a data analyst or scientist. And touching on these platforms, a lot of them are open source. It's so easy for you to go and self-learn. Some of these organizations just don't let you know about that. Some people think you have to just have a PhD or you have to go and study data science. You can absolutely teach yourself a bit of Python, a bit of R, learn how to code, join communities, join in Kaggle challenges, learn in that sense, and then make your journey into data or data analytics. But a lot of work needs to be done by organizations to just really just start being reflective of society. And for us in particular, Black people or people of color, I talk to my friends about data. I talk to the people at the bus stop about data. So I'm just there, just talking about it. You can get into it. The way I see it, if I can do it, anyone can do it. So yeah, just talking about it and just promoting it and be welcoming to people when they get into it.
That's brilliant, and I think one of the topics you just mentioned there, and it'd be keen to find out what would be your advice, what you think companies could be doing who don't currently have a good ethnicity split, and they do on their website. They do have a predominantly white or a predominantly ethnic homogeneous, should we say, team. What should they be doing if they've identified that they do need to address that balance? What could they be doing?
They need to collaborate with organizations that are out there that help them to work around what their challenges are. So there are specific organizations that will come into your companies to assess the situation. They need to understand the dynamic, first of all. What is the reason? What's your main reason? Is it a hiring issue? Is it a retention issue? First, identifying that. And then it might be a branding issue. It may be that your brand is not really positively thought of in the Black and ethnic minority. Are you seen as a racist company? These sort of things are happening. So you need to be aware of how the ethnic minority communities perceive you and your organization. Start there, talk to the communities, talk to other organizations, and just engage and work with us. As I said, it needs to be authentic. Do not just hire the next random guy and think all of your problems will be solved, because it probably won't be.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you say there about companies that are fundamentally racist, and I would imagine that there's probably a few of your competitors outside of the Guardian, other newspaper groups that would probably fall potentially into.
I am not allowed to talk about
Of course you're not.
That wasn't me trying. Newspapers.
That wasn't me trying to lead you into trouble there at all, Sadika. That was very much me saying that.
What my advice to them is they really need to take a hard look at themselves. Why do they feel the way that they do? What is it about immigration or ethnicity that really rubs them up the wrong way? Why are they afraid of people of color?
It's a good question. I can't answer that one, but we'll try and get someone on the next panel.
Aren't you, Alex? We're not a right-wing newspaper.
No, absolutely. No, I know that completely. And I mean, Chris Perrin, I've just seen, has just posted a website, I believe, or an app perhaps, called Code Your Future, which is focused around supporting refugees and disadvantaged get roles in coding. And I think it is initiatives like that and businesses like that, which I've certainly seen a huge growth in, that are going to be able to try and redress that balance at a grassroots level and start to sort of bring that next generation of people through who have previously not had those opportunities. David, I apologise. I've not really asked you too many questions up to this point. I do apologise for that. But I was really keen to find out from you, as I've mentioned, and I think you've mentioned on the panel, we've certainly seen a huge amount of growth at NatWest over the last 12 months or so. What have been the key successes and challenges that you've faced when hiring people from different demographic backgrounds?
Yeah, I was going to get a quiet night tonight. Yeah, I thought it was going to be all quiet.
I'm just making sure you're still awake.
I'm still awake. It's such a passionate conversation, so I'm certainly not going to fall asleep. Listen, I guess the challenges and constraints in NatWest certainly has been a huge thrust and activity, and therefore the kind of work that I do. So I hire program managers, project managers, scrum masters, agile capability testers, all of that in the project space. So with every new piece of work, we try and scale out. What I think is difficult, or was difficult up until about 12 months ago, was clearly the group's footprint was to try and move, reduce the footprint in London and try and sort of concentrate more in Edinburgh. Big global organisation, obviously, but that was and therefore trying to recruit within the Edinburgh circles, you're confined to that area. So I guess if that's the market, or that's the pond that you're fishing in for resources, and normally what I try and do is to get resources quickly, depend heavily on the contingent market, contractors or managed service operatives. And therefore, when we start to get somebody or teams who are really, really good, we try then to bring them in on a permanent basis. It's quick and it works, and that helps. But confined to a particular area, up until about a year ago, really, you don't know what you don't know, because you're operating in Edinburgh circles. So hopefully I'm keeping in line with your conversation. I'm not as experienced as my fellow panelists here, but keep me right. What happened a year ago? Well, crikey, COVID came along and everything that came with it. But we too operate in a very different way. Didn't know what was going to happen with the volume of work that was coming through, and one eye on the demand, and are we going to start to save money? We could see about that happening, but actually, because data is such a unique commodity, they actually needed more of it to deal with all the propositions and the lending and everything that comes with it. So therefore, we started to see a spike in demand. I had to go to market even more. Now, as things started to progress in the last 12 months, it became obvious that the pandemic wasn't going to go away anytime quick, and therefore, in conversation with TIS, why do I need to constrain myself to an Edinburgh market? And that was a challenge that actually came back to me, and I'm thinking, you're absolutely right. If it's a contingent resource I'm looking for, we can actually do that. We started to spread the net a bit further and looked at resources who we wouldn't normally have considered for all the right reasons: location, Manchester, London, and so on and so forth, Nottingham, Birmingham. not a problem. And so far, that's what we've been doing. And therefore, it's opened up a whole new host of opportunities for us. And I think we've been very successful. I say that, I mean, the resources that we've got, we couldn't have tapped into that market before. And it's been a very, very successful, the kind of complexity of the work that we're undertaking. It's not easy, right? You know, but we are out there looking for the very, very best resources. Able, with the ability to look further afield, it just opens things up for us. And no immediate rush to get into the office, and things will hopefully change. But right now we've got a wide range of resources that bring in a different perspective, and all really interested in is actually getting the very, very best in the marketplace. That's a very competitive thing. So it's been very positive in that sense. Not sure if that's answered all your questions there, Alec, but that's been the experience in the last year.
Yeah, no, that's really good, and certainly you're not the only company that we've worked with who are in, should we say, a much more remote part of the UK than Edinburgh, who have always really struggled. And I won't say the location because it will probably give the company away, but they do live in an area where it is very undiverse. There is a very small percentage of people that aren't white people. So throughout COVID, it has given them the opportunity to work in a more remote fashion and hire people in a fully remote area. So they have been able to hire people and give people an opportunity, and therefore obviously join the business who come from places like London, Birmingham, Manchester, where there is a greater deal of diversity. And they have just seen, obviously it's difficult to compare it to pre-lockdown and pre-COVID, but they've already seen a huge amount of innovation, a huge amount of performance that they wouldn't have been tapping into before, that the lockdown has allowed them to do. That said, I do also know that there are a lot of, broadly speaking, from a kind of macroeconomic perspective, there has been that COVID has forced a back step in many respects when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Schwetter, I know we've spoken that in the past, haven't we, around that. What was I can't remember exactly what it was, but you said that there was a study recently where people haven't necessarily enjoyed the same amount of improvement as David and the team at NatWest have.
Yeah, so it's like I was hearing to David, I was looking at McKinsey's study. Actually, there was a study done by McKinsey last year, and they said that COVID-19 has actually set women back half a decade. And that's mainly because whenever there is a choice between, work, you have to balance the work and the work-life balance, then mostly it's the women who takes a step back. And that's been surprising to me. But and second thing, I think, which resulted this, because most of the jobs which has gone out is on retail, consumer facing, and people who lost job is primarily from that demographic. And that caused a lot of, like, it says that it's just set women about half a decade, which I think is mind-boggling for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is. I think particularly because at the start of lockdown, I think a lot of people's perception was probably, well, greater flexibility is going to result in an improvement in diversity and inclusion, and people they don't need to worry about bringing themselves to work because they're working remotely, and they can share household tasks with work tasks. Now, I don't have children, but I have a fairly active dog, and I know even trying to balance a work and a dog is difficult, let alone if you've got children and things like that. And it has, I think, certainly from speaking to people in the market, and it is fairly anecdotal, I've certainly felt a lot of people actually really struggling to be as productive at work and be as high performing as they would have been had they have been still able to go to the office for periods of time. I'm not so sure around any studies around sort of ethnic diversity within COVID and how that's impacted Sadika. Has there been anything in particular that you've seen around that?
I've not looked into that at all, but I am curious though to ask Schwetter about her ethnic representation within her company. You spoke about having women in all levels. What does that look like for ethnicity?
Yeah, we have very mixed background, people from Saudi Arabia, we have Spanish, we have people from South Africa. So it's a mix of, I would rather say that, that at every level, I can say that there is diversity from, like, not just from a gender diversity standpoint, but also from an ethnicity standpoint as well.
That's great. And Nikki, I know we've spoken in the past, and I wasn't sure if it was tied into your role in your current role, or indeed if it was outside to that, about a number of reports that you've worked on and had visibility of around the impact of COVID-19 on DE&I. I can't remember exactly what the stats were. Would you be able to sort of disclose some of that information?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of studies that Kantar Public is doing on the impact of COVID, but also more generally on particularly gender, actually, because our CEO, she kind of leads a piece of research every year called the Regulator Index, and that really is a study across markets that looks at how women are perceived in leadership roles. And what that actually shows is that still today, that when people are asked the sort of outright question, do you think that women are equally as good in leadership roles, people say yes, because they know that otherwise they'll just sound like a bigot, so they typically say yes. But then when you dig in and you start asking questions around different types of jobs, and do you think in this kind of leadership role, like in engineering or in medicine or whatever it might be, that's when some of this starts to come out. And of course then we find that actually across most countries, and this is actually focused, this work, on the G7, and you may be surprised to know that within that the UK actually came out with the most equal views on women in leadership roles. But still, that there is that difference, and women are still seen as stronger in the caring roles rather than in the STEM kind of roles, and that is the reality. But just to come back on your question around sort of the impact of COVID, I think that there's been so much, and this isn't necessarily from work from Kantar Public, but just in the press more generally, about, of course, the bigger impact that COVID has had on the BAME community, and in part because of the, again, that sort of mix of the jobs that people do based on, proportionately by their ethnicity. And I think that has, certainly increased awareness. I don't know whether other people on the panel sort of see that as well, but I think it has been one extra thing to highlight that inequality that is there, because there are more people in frontline jobs of ethnic backgrounds and from the BAME community, and we've seen that through the infection rates. So I hope that has sort of helped to inform people and make them realize that that's the profile of the society that we live in, and that we need to address that.
Absolutely. And in terms of the Regulator Index, what is where is the sort of background of it? Where does it sort of specifically around Reykjavik, rather than around the second part of what you were saying there? Where's that come from, and what is the sort of target audience, if you like, of those reports, and what's being done off the back of it?
Yeah, it's really focused around sort of decision makers for public policy and business. So it's actually done every year to coincide with the Davos get together of the great and the good, but really as a measure and as a measure over time of how things are changing. And I think, unfortunately, data, it tells us hopefully the truth rather than what we want to hear, and the reality is it isn't changing. So we haven't really seen much movement in the Reykjavik Index over the past few years, and maybe we'll see, to Schwetter's point, that actually COVID has moved it backwards. We might see that next year, but certainly the last couple of years there hasn't really been any movement. And we were talking earlier about role models, and maybe when we see on a global stage a new role model enter, as we have in the US, does that help to shift perceptions? I don't know. I think these changes are showing that they're taking a lot of time, because they're so deep rooted in society, and we aren't doing enough at the sort of ground level up, you know, in education and communities to help sort of change what, you know, what sets people's perceptions for the future. I mean, I'm not a social expert myself, but it's just that I think the pace of change isn't as fast as we might experience it to be.
Absolutely. And I think it really is the data that underpins that, because I think, again, misconceptions, most people probably think that things are moving massively in the right direction, and that people are more tolerant and people are, there is greater equality or equity, should I say. But the data would suggest that's not the case. And it's where, you know, being aware of the data is one thing. It's actually executing it and actually doing things, as you say, at a grassroots and education level that are actually going to change things for the future. In terms of, I mean, we've kind of got through the core key questions. There's been obviously a lot of ideas shared and a lot of topics discussed. Is there anyone else on the panel that had any other points that might have been raised before that they'd particularly like to talk about?
Oh. Hey, hello there. So once again, very passionate conversation. It's been a pleasure just listening. I think one thing I would say is imbalance. There's a lot of real strength when I talk about female leadership out there. I'm going to tell you about, I had a cracking role at the Direct Line Group, and I'm a contract worker myself, all right? So I had a cracking role at the Direct Line Group, and I was loving it. But I got a call to see if I was interested in speaking to NatWest about my current role. And I went along, and I had a call, well, I actually had a telephone conversation first, and then a face-to-face interview. I still wasn't convinced about actually sort of taking the role, but the lady who interviewed me, I don't mind telling your name, but she's still with the organisation. It's her that got me, you know. She was a leader. She knew exactly what she wanted to do, and she was very clear about it and very driven. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, I wasn't attracted by a massive organization, FTSE 100 company or whatever. I've been there before. This person actually got their hooks into me just by the passion, the direction, the vision, yeah, and equally the confidence that she had after just a few short meetings with myself to give me the license to operate and go and develop probably a delivery function, if you get that, in data technology from something that's pretty much nothing. So that's quite a thing, I think, you know. Clearly, and when I've been listening to my colleagues here, actually what we need is more of that, you know. And I think it's such a powerful thing when you start to work with someone, and I'm just speaking about myself here, and getting the license to operate and the confidence to go and do it. And I made up my mind when I started to grow the team from, crikey, I think it was like 4 people, now I've got 70, you know, into a big team. I just wanted people to come in. I want to get the best, and I want, when they come in, to have the confidence to go and do their job, to get their brand across it, and just be themselves. And I think that's something that's really, really important. And it's something that empowered me internally. You don't see it written down anywhere. It was just something that was quite powerful at that point. So listen, there's quite a lot of really strong views here, and in balance, there's a very, very positive experience there as well. All right, but clearly there's a lot to be done. A lot to be done here.
Absolutely. Thanks, David. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I love the fact that, David, you gave example of a strong female lead there. I would love personally one day for us to get to a position where we can talk about a strong Black lead, to normalize Black people in power. Right now, it's not something that I hear, and it's just heartbreaking because the talent is there. We just need to support our communities and just level the playing field. So one day we can have these normalized conversations where it's not even a big deal. Yeah, that guy, he hired me, he was a Black guy. Or that Black lady, she hired me and she was awesome. So I'd hope to have that conversation with you one day, David.
Hey, how do you know what color she was?
Well, I'm assuming she's not Black.
See? Well, when we have that conversation, I'll buy you a cup of tea and I'll tell you all about it. Okay.
Is it Glasgow or Edinburgh? Because you can talk about it. It sounds quite lovely.
Can I ask a question, actually? Do you mind, Alex, if I ask Sadika a question? Because I think, you know, what I have been thinking whilst we've been having this conversation is that I think it's so much easier for organisations, for D&I, to latch on to gender because it is easier to achieve, let's face it. And, you know, how, you know, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? And do you, because in many ways it's a bit of a cop-out, isn't it? Because it's kind of, how can we show we're making progress in the way that's the easiest? But it must be really frustrating, because for people who have you know, their diversity is not gender, it's like, well, you know, why do we have to have a ranking of this? But, you know, I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
For me, I think everybody gravitates towards the person that is most like them. So if an organization says, I want to diversify, what will be the easiest thing, the first step that they will take? What's the closest thing to them is another white female. That really is the bottom line. We will always go towards the people that are essentially look and sound like we do. It's a shame that that's what it is. But for me, I don't know. That's the only reason why I think it's the way that it is. Exposing ourselves to a wider community, meeting with people, understanding that a lot of the differences that we perceive are actually not the case, might make it a little bit easier to you know, bridge those barriers and to remove those disconnects. Most people don't. I find the struggle for me particularly, people just are not aware. They just don't really know what my experiences are. So sometimes they might find it a little bit difficult to talk to me because of those perceptions. But once we start talking, go for a cup of tea, they realize, oh, okay, so maybe you are cool. So I think, yeah, talking to each other, connecting with each other, you'll find that it is really not a major issue. It's just the perception that most people have.
Excellent.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, guys. I'm not sure. I know that we are going to the last, going into the networking session, which starts earlier on. So I'm not sure if this is all of a sudden going to end. But before we do go, we do have a fourth poll question. Again, I've said this so many times now, but we will be. We will be writing a report following this event, so please do contribute. Was there any questions at all from the audience? Anything else that people wanted to ask in the chat box? Appreciate, obviously, we will be moving on to the networking session, which Alfie has just sent out to all attendees. So if you get your questions ready, then we can see you on the panel. Just before we do go, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists, Nikki, Sadika, Schwetter, and David. I really do appreciate you spending your evening with us, and indeed for sharing your insights, and of course to the audience for participating. Our next Soda Social comes up on the 31st of March. It won't be focused around diversity, it will be focused around leadership within software engineering. So for those that wish to continue or to find out more around that area, then please do attend. But as I say, this is the first of the Diversity in Data event series, and we certainly look to continue this moving forward, and to be looking into many different ways that, as I say, coming back to those three core areas, companies can get better when it comes to attracting, hiring and retaining diverse talent. We are completely open in terms of the next event series. We're looking at certainly very shortly bringing in an event around neurodiversity in particular, and are open to many different topics earlier on. But it's the success of it is completely dependent upon you guys, the audience, not only for attending, but also for sharing your ideas for future events, speakers, topics, etc. So please do reach out to us and keep your eyes peeled for the article that will be coming out soon. Guys, thanks so much to the panel. We'll see you all in the networking session. I hope to see a bunch of the attendees as well there as well.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks so much, guys. See you shortly.